Letters from Lalalam refers to the colloquial pronunciation of the city Rotterdam by the Dutch-Chinese diaspora. My family would jokingly refer to Rotterdam as Lalalam. And I'm based in Rotterdam. Rotterdam is also the home of the largest Southeast East Asian diaspora population in the Netherlands. And I derive inspiration from the services and signboards and light boxes and signage basically that can be seen there. And I think the word letters, in the sense that it literally refers to text and typography and letters, but it's also a letter, an account from the diaspora to Malaysia, to Kuala Lumpur, where my parents are from. I think what interests me about looking at shop signage, for instance, is that there's a certain language being used by the South and Southeast Asian diaspora in the Netherlands that you probably recognize it. It refers a lot to luck and prosperity, and that also expresses itself in images of like pearls or wildly flowing rivers. Gold, references to gold and to blossoming lotus flowers and that sort of thing. And I just think this language of fortune and prosperity and wealth, which is what the diaspora is looking for when they come to Rotterdam, it's just such a stark contrast with how these words and images are displayed. So often these light boxes or neon signs, they've been around for a while. They're weathered and worn, or like discolored from the sun, or the decal is sort of peeling, and the lights are maybe a little bit broken and flickering. And if you look at the signs alone, like how they look aesthetically and what they say, there's kind of a contrast in between. And for me, that reveals something about the actual reality of, for instance, such a service. Of course, it's all also a little bit conjecture that comes from myself growing up in a restaurant and knowing what the words say and how it is presented outwards, and at the same time knowing how hard my parents worked and what their life really looked like. So when I walk around Rotterdam and I see these signs, the aesthetic of the signs and the words of the signs, it reminds me of that, thinking about what is behind the sign and what does the aesthetic quality of the signs say about the desires maybe of a shop owner and the reality that is lived. I myself, as an artist, am quite inspired by art from the 70s, United States, and from the Western historical canon of art. And in that time, minimalist and conceptual art also used a lot of light boxes and neon signs, etc. And I was always really drawn by that. But what those works propose is very clean and very industrial and very pristine. That carries some sort of meaning of something that you can project on with your mind, that's something clean and something open and something free that you as a visitor can come in and have your own ideas about. I think why I wanted to paint, for instance, my light boxes white is because I wanted first to touch on this feeling of it being weathered, being used, having had a life before. Also, I like the fact that you can see a hand in this work, so that it doesn't allude to like faceless sort of industry or a faceless or an object that is devoid of human activity. So that is why I chose to hand paint or always hand finish a lot of these sculptures. Yeah, and I think in that way I'm also trying to draw into the aesthetics and the history of art history, this idea that art is not just about ideas, but it's also about people that are living and working, maybe in working class or an immigrant class. And that is basically what I'm trying to draw in to the conversation that already exists in the world of art. And I am specifically trying to talk to the art history context, as well as drawing from my experience growing up in a restaurant. So that's the attempt. Yeah. And a lot of like signage and light solutions, as they call it in the commercial world, have the similar kind of qualities as a lot of this work that was popularized in the 70s. But we just kind of fail to see them because they're so ordinary, they're so mundane. So something like an exit sign, it's something you see in every restaurant because it's a safety measure, it's very common. And there are a lot of different kinds of them. The one that I sort of reiterated in that sculpture exit is one of those light solutions that I find very elegant, actually, very beautiful. And making a drawing by hand or by drawing in this mythical lion dance, this lion creature, I'm trying to actually make something very mythical ordinary, or something very ordinary mythical, or I'm trying to contrast a little bit these two worlds, and also talk a little bit about how, you know, when you start a restaurant or my parents moved to the Netherlands, you know, all your glorious culture can maybe be, flattened down to something very ordinary, very mundane, something very easy for people to consume. Someone once said, "You cannot be what you cannot see," and I think that it says quite a lot about experience of a lot of people who grow up without any representation in media or art or history books or public space. It's something that maybe it's not even that you cannot be something that you cannot see, but like it might not even occur to you that you could be anything like that. So when I started doing my self-portraits, it was actually, I was just curious, you know, like if I've never seen people like myself who are queer, gender non-conforming, Asian, Dutch at the same time, being an artist or being things that I wanted to be. I think I just very simply started looking at myself, and I started drawing kind of as a meditation, kind of as a way also to acknowledge myself. And I think I was also just kind of searching for a return back to drawing, back to the skill of drawing, but also a bit searching for myself or something, like the way I'm searching for representation in the world outside of me. I'm just kind of started to wonder, like, okay, but actually what do I see, you know, like when I look at myself. And I was doing these self-portraits every day for almost a year, till at some point it became kind of like a self-empowering process. I could start to see myself more clearly, and I could start to realize that maybe I don't actually need examples outside of myself, like I can be my own example. Every day I could be actually someone else. Some days maybe I look more like a man, and some days I look more like a woman. After I had the conversation with my mother, I kind of looked like my mother, you know, like it was interesting, and it taught me that there's actually a wealth in the world inside that does not need to come from outside. The idea for lotus flowers actually started with me thinking that the flowers that we used to fold for our table setting, that they were water lilies. And when I was 21, I was super inspired by this work by Monet from 1916 called The Water Lilies, very famous. And it was the same time that painting started to become an autonomous art form rather than a representational art form. Very important moment in art history. And I really liked the contrast between that idea of the water lilies being a changing moment in the art to the idea that we had water lilies that took a long time to fold, that people wiped their mouths on. Like this again, like trying to contrast sort of the everyday sort of lived experience of an immigrant family and sort of the canonical ideas within Western art history. But very soon into the conversation with my mother, I found out that they were actually lotus flowers and not water lilies. And when we got to talking about lotus flowers more, my mother actually said that lotus flowers growing in the wild you can never pick because if you pick them you might get stuck and you might drown. And I heard in this, sounded like this kind of parable of like a diasporic or an immigrant story of going to the West to get something or to pick something, but maybe getting stuck and not returning. And so I think that what started out as something that was supposed to, in my head, conceptually address like the sort of contrast between art history and lived immigrant life became more about, the diaspora. So, I hope that answers a little bit. I'm not sure if that it ends where we're in between two worlds, but that's where it comes from. Well, I think what's interesting about my practice or my position actually as an artist is that in the Netherlands I'm talking a lot about the Dutch context and the Western context of art. As you may also hear in some other answers, I really try to sort of like address things that I was taught in my education and maybe also address some biases or context. In Malaysia though, the context is of course different and I'm very aware of that. I think what I would like Malaysian audience to take away from is something that I could not necessarily, verbalize, because of course I want people to take something away that is maybe also personal to them, and that is something that I cannot, put into their mind. But I think the idea of letters from Lalalam is to give an account of what I think it's like or how it's been like for me and maybe for my family and maybe for people who can relate in the Netherlands to that diasporic experience from the Netherlands to here. And I hope that the Malaysian audience can draw something from that in relationship to their own experience, maybe diasporic experience, maybe not diasporic experience, but maybe they also know people who have moved, or maybe they have considered moving in the past. Maybe they sometimes think, hey, what would it have been like if we, if I had moved then, and what would life be like there? And maybe take something from that and maybe also have an appreciation for what is here or your own particular circumstance, or maybe just take an account or observe what it might have been like and see what that brings you in complexity or layers. That's what I would like people to take from it, yeah.